So I'd like to welcome everyone here to this third program in the series. This one is about compassion practice, particularly based on the 4 immeasurables. So let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this program. We have, as Miffy mentioned, we've got 5 sessions. Each one will be 90 minutes from 7 till 8:30. Each session will be made up of a presentation followed by meditation, another presentation, another meditation, and then Q&A at the end of the session. Today's session will be focusing on the loving kindness practice and also how to deal with attachment. On Wednesday this week, we'll be looking at compassion practice and how to deal with anger. And then next week, as Miffy mentioned, the Monday, there is nothing for this program. It's just the Wednesday. We'll be looking at the empathetic joy and equanimity practices. The following week, we'll be looking at a process called exchanging self with others. And in connection with that, on the Wednesday of that week, the Tonglen or giving and taking practice. The recommended reading for this program is the 4 Immeasurables book from Alan Wallace, and in particular relating to the exchanging self with others, Buddhism with an Attitude, which is his book or his commentary on the Lojong, the 7-point mind training, which is based on this approach of exchanging self with others. So let's have a look at what we're going to be doing in this first session on loving kindness. But before we do, let's just do a very short meditation just to prepare the body, prepare the mind, and to set a good motivation. And as we did earlier with all the meditations, I'll switch off my webcam so not as to distract you. So if you'd like to find nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, allow your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face, and soften and relax all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And preparing the mind. setting it into a state of ease and relaxation, releasing all activities of the mind, and simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment, resting in stillness. And setting a positive motivation for attending this compassion program. Trying to make the motivation as expansive as possible. Trying to include others in your motivation as well. And for any of you who are following the Mahayana vehicle, the highest motivation is the motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others. And then keeping this motivation in mind, we can slowly end this meditation and begin our discussions here together this evening. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session this evening. We'll begin with an overview of the compassion practice in general, and then we'll have a look specifically at the loving kindness practice. We'll do a guided meditation on cultivating loving kindness, a few tips for that practice after the meditation. Then we'll look at attachment, what it is and how to deal with it. We'll do then a guided meditation on some ways of dealing with attachment. After the meditation, dispelling some misconceptions regarding attachment. Time for some question answer at the end of the session, and then we'll finish with a dedication to finish the session. So let's look at compassion practice in general. We can talk about the two main wings of practice. In Sanskrit, that is prajna and upaya, often translated as wisdom and method. The wisdom practice is often referred to as vipassana, and the method practice is all of our activities which are based on compassion. So often this method wing is called the compassion wing. And at the foundation level in the Theravada Buddhist traditions based on the Pali texts, the wisdom wing is these three marks of existence, these insights into impermanence, suffering, no self. And the compassion wing of practice is the core of this, these four immeasurables. Whereas in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, based on the Sanskrit texts, then both of those wings are built on. that on top of the 3 marks of existence, we look at in terms of wisdom, the wisdom of emptiness. And on the basis of the 4 immeasurables, then we go on to cultivate this aspiration of bodhicitta. And so here in the compassion practice, the core of the compassion practice are these 4 immeasurables we see listed here of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, equanimity. Loving kindness in Sanskrit is Maitri, in Pali it's Metta. And this is simply the wish for ourselves and others to have happiness in its causes. Compassion is Sanskrit and Pali Karuna, which is the wish for ourselves and others to be free of suffering in its causes. Empathetic joy, or mudita in Sanskrit and Pali, is a rejoicing in our own and others' virtues and good fortune. And then equanimity is upeksha in Sanskrit and upeka in Pali, is an unbiased, impartial attitude towards others, not having attachment to friends, apathy to strangers, or aversion to difficult people. And these are the 4 qualities we'll be looking at in the coming sessions. Today, we'll be focusing on the loving kindness. And then in terms of the Theravada vehicle, what's called the door of entry, how do we enter into that vehicle, is through what's called renunciation, which actually is a poor translation of the original Sanskrit term nisarana. Nisarana, ni prefix means out of, sarana means to move. So nisarana is actually the aspiration or wish to move out of or away from suffering, to be liberated from suffering. So it's actually the aspiration for liberation from suffering, which is self-compassion, compassion for ourselves. In the Mahayana, we take that one step further, in that we can understand that we ourselves, not only we ourselves are in suffering and want to be liberated, but everyone else is in the same situation. So we build on that compassion to cultivate the aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others, which is this bodhicitta in Sanskrit. Bodhi is enlightenment, citta is mind, literally the mind of enlightenment, the mind which aspires to enlightenment for the benefit of others. Now, historically, there were 2 main methods for cultivating bodhicitta, one called the 7 cause and effect, and the other one called equalizing and exchanging self with others. And within the second technique, there is a meditative practice called tong len, or giving and taking. And it's the second method that we'll be looking at in this compassion program. So we won't actually be talking much about bodhicitta at all, but this process used to cultivate bodhicitta is very relevant for us in the modern world, because here we're talking about overcoming the selfish attitude and replacing that with the attitude of cherishing others. So then in the compassion training in this program, we're starting off with the foundation of the 4 immeasurables in the coming 3 sessions. Session 4, then we'll look at this exchanging self with others approach, and particularly in session 5, the tong len, or giving and taking practice. And then in conjunction with the loving kindness practice in this session, we'll be looking also at how to deal with attachment. And then on Wednesday, when we look at the actual compassion practice, we'll also look in that context of how to deal with anger. And then in the last session, the 5th session, we'll also be looking at how to integrate this compassion training into daily life. So let's now look at loving kindness, and we'll begin with a quote from a great Indian Buddhist master, Shantideva, from the 8th century, and he says, "Those desiring to escape from suffering hasten right toward their own misery. And with the very desire for happiness, out of delusion, they destroy their own well-being as if it were the enemy." Loving kindness here is a translation of the original Sanskrit term Maitri, or the Pali term Metta. And loving kindness is defined as the wish or aspiration for ourselves and others to have happiness in its causes. So what we see here is that loving kindness, or Maitri and Metta, is not an emotion, it's an aspiration, it's a wish. Therefore, I think it's better to translate Maitri and Metta as loving kindness, rather than, as sometimes the case, is translated as love. Because love, for us, generally is understood as an emotion, and it often implies some sort of intimate behavior. Whereas here, Maitri and Metta is not an emotion. It's an aspiration. It's a wish. Hence, I think it's more accurate to translate as loving kindness. Now, we already have a desire for happiness. However, it's often misdirected. And as Shantideva says, out of delusion, we destroy our own well-being as if it were our enemy. So therefore, to actually cultivate loving kindness, we need to know three things. We need to know what is happiness, what are the causes of happiness, and how do we cultivate those causes? Because if we don't know those three things, then loving kindness is simply words with no meaning. And as Shantideva said, then we will simply destroy our own well-being as if it were the enemy. So let's have a look at these 3 points. What is happiness? What are the causes of happiness? And how do we cultivate those causes? Because if we know those 3 things, then loving kindness has meaning. And then we will use that as a basis for actually pursuing happiness. And we won't destroy our own well-being as if it were the enemy. What is happiness? Here we can talk about 2 types of happiness. The first is called temporal happiness, which is simply another name for our pleasurable experiences. This then is a stimulus-based happiness, meaning we have a particular stimulus and then we have a pleasant experience. Therefore, it's called conditioned happiness. We have certain conditions come together, certain stimulus, then we have a pleasant experience. Therefore, by its nature, this type of happiness is transient, because when the stimulus finishes, the pleasant experience finishes. It's unsustainable because the stimulus always comes to an end. It's unreliable because without the stimulus, we can't have that experience. And if we look closely at our pleasant experiences, we'll see they're really not even in the nature of happiness. Because if our pleasant experiences were in the nature of happiness, it would mean that the more we engaged in them, the more happy we should become. But we know from our own experience that if we overindulge in our pleasant experiences, not only don't they make us more happy, they often tend to lead to a lot of unnecessary suffering. Classic example is eating too much of our favorite dessert or spending too long out in the nice warm sunshine. This type of happiness then is really all about what we can get from the world, and we can never get enough. Whereas genuine happiness is a state of inner well-being that does not require any particular stimulus to be present. So therefore, it's not a stimulus-based happiness. Therefore, it's often called unconditioned happiness, a state of well-being. We can be in that state regardless of what's going on around us. Therefore, this type of happiness is stable, it is sustainable, it is reliable, and it is in the nature of happiness. And this type of happiness is more about what we can bring to the world. Therefore, when we're talking about loving kindness, the aspiration for happiness, the wish for happiness, we're mainly talking about the second one, the genuine happiness. Now, unfortunately, we often tend to mistake the first one for the second one, meaning that we often hope that our pleasurable experiences are going to satisfy us and fulfill us. Therefore, what happens is we end up with a lot of craving and attachment to our pleasurable experiences, trying to hold on to them, trying to make them last. But unfortunately, that craving and attachment to pleasurable experiences simply often leads to a lot of worry and anxiety about not getting it, not getting enough of it, or potentially losing it. And often it leads to frustration when we don't get it, overindulging when we do get it, and also often leads to dissatisfaction and disappointment when things don't live up to our expectations. And then we often feel the reason we're not fully satisfied is we just simply didn't get enough of that thing. So then we simply end up with more craving. So we get stuck in that cycle of endless craving. And then we also, through that craving and attachment, we actually stop enjoying the things we used to enjoy. And we know this well. If there's something we really enjoy in our life, but we get it too often, it doesn't take too many times of getting it in a row before craving and attachment then goes, sorry, that's not good enough anymore. That's boring. I need something bigger, better, and different. So attachment is never satisfied. Now, if we don't mistake pleasure for genuine happiness and understand there are actually two types of happiness, then we can strive for the genuine happiness, the inner well-being, and actually at the same time, therefore, enjoy our pleasurable experiences more fully, because we'll be able to let go of the craving and attachment, because we'll know and appreciate that these pleasurable experiences will never satisfy us and never fulfill us, and therefore we'll actually enjoy them more fully. Therefore, we need to understand, in terms of a pursuit of happiness, it's not a choice. It's not like either we go for pleasure or we go for genuine happiness. And often that's a mistaken idea based on this term renunciation, which we just saw, because renunciation is the entry point into the path to genuine happiness. And so people mistakenly believe renunciation means I need to renounce, I need to give up all my pleasurable experiences. That's simply not true. Renunciation is not about giving up pleasurable experiences. Renunciation is about giving up an unhealthy attitude towards them. And that attitude is the craving and attachment, hoping that they're going to fulfill us. If we can simply let go of that, we can enjoy them more fully. Therefore, and then here, what are the causes of happiness? We can introduce this with a quote from the Buddha, who says, find out what really constitutes true well-being, and based on this understanding, pursue it. So what are the causes of genuine happiness? In the Theravada Buddhist traditions, based on the Pali texts, this is often presented as the Noble Eightfold Path. There are 8 practices we need to engage in to achieve this genuine happiness and well-being. Whereas in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, based on the Sanskrit texts, the presentation generally is the 6 perfections. But when we look at both those presentations, we can condense both of them down to the same 3 core areas of practice, called the 3 higher trainings of ethics, concentration, and wisdom. Ethics in Sanskrit and Pali is shila, concentration is samadhi, and in the Theravada traditions, this is often called jhana practice. In the Mahayana traditions, it's called shamatha practice. And the wisdom, or prajna in Sanskrit, is often called vipassana in the Pali traditions, the Theravada traditions based on Pali, and it's called vipassana in the Mahayana traditions. That's the Sanskrit term. So these are the 3 core areas of practice. And we looked in an earlier program how the Noble Eightfold Path and the 6 perfections can be subsumed or condensed into the 3 higher trainings. And so we have this slide here again. We see that the right speech, right action, right livelihood can be subsumed as ethics. Right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, subsumed as concentration. Right view and right thought, subsumed as wisdom. And in the 6 perfections, the practices of generosity, ethics, patience can be subsumed as ethics. Then we have concentration and wisdom. And joyous effort, the 4th of the 6 perfections, is something we need to apply to all 3. So we can see that in all Buddhist traditions, the 3 core areas of practice are ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And so in that vipassana practice, the wisdom practice, we overcome our distorted view of reality, which is the underlying cause of our mental afflictions and suffering. So if we can have a direct insight into nature of reality, then we can achieve that genuine happiness, inner well-being. To have a direct insight into reality, we need shamatha, we need the concentration practice, single point of concentration. To be able to engage in this, we need ethical lifestyle. So therefore, to cultivate the causes of happiness, the foundation is ethics. We need to begin by avoiding harmful behavior. On that basis, we engage in the concentration or shamatha practice to develop that single-pointed concentration. And on that basis, we engage in the wisdom or vipassana practice to come to an insight into nature of reality. In Theravada traditions, this is often presented in terms of the 3 marks of existence, of impermanence, suffering, no self. And in the Mahayana, this insight into emptiness. So therefore, if we know what happiness is, what are the causes of happiness, and how to cultivate those causes here, then loving kindness really has meaning, and we can develop that aspiration for and wish for ourselves and others to have happiness and its causes. And that would then inspire us as an individual to strive for genuine happiness ourselves, and it would inspire us to help others to do likewise. Now, in terms of cultivating this loving kindness, it's recommended we do it in stages. In the classic texts, generally 4 stages were mentioned. First, cultivate it towards friends because it's most easy. Then expand out to include strangers. Once we're comfortable there, expand out to difficult people, the so-called enemies, the people we don't like, and then eventually to all living beings. But I think in the modern world, we need to add one more step at the very beginning, which often wasn't mentioned in the old texts, and that is first cultivate loving kindness for ourselves. Because unfortunately, in our modern world, many people are not very kind to themselves. In fact, they beat themselves up and even have self-hatred. So that's where we really need to begin. First, cultivate loving kindness toward ourselves, and then slowly expand out to others. That's what we're going to do now. We're going to do meditation of cultivating loving kindness, going through those stages. If you'd like to find a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. We begin, as always, by preparing the body, meaning establishing a good posture, keeping the back nice and straight, and at the same time allow the entire body to become completely relaxed. Using the out breath to relax and release any tightness or tension. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in that stillness. Loving kindness is the wish or aspiration for ourselves and others to have happiness in its causes. And we can begin by cultivating loving kindness toward ourselves and then expanding out to others. Now, no matter how much mental afflictions are in our mind, that is, no matter how much craving and attachment, anger and jealousy, fear and anxiety, and so on are in our mind, these mental afflictions are not part of the nature of our mind. They're merely like dirt covering the surface of our mind. And beneath these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. So imagine this inner purity of your mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light in the center of your chest at the level of your heart. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I had happiness in its causes. May I be truly well and happy. And then imagine on each out-breath, rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling and saturating your entire body and mind. Imagining the light transforms into everything you need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to yourself whatever you need to be happy, both in the short term and the long term. And then imagine you've now found the genuine happiness that you seek. And simply rest in that inner well-being, that inner purity of mind. And just as you wish to be happy, so does everyone else. So next bring to mind someone close to you, a loved one, and imagine them very clearly in front of you. And arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness in its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from your heart and filling their entire body and mind. and transforming into everything they need to be happy. So with each out breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy, both in the short term and the long term. And then imagine they've now found the genuine happiness that they seek, and take delight in this. And next bring to mind someone who you know well, but is neither a friend nor someone who you dislike. And again, picture them very clearly in front of you. They are just like yourself in wanting to be happy. And so arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness in its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And with each out breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And then imagine they've now found the genuine happiness that they seek. And rejoice in this. And next bring to mind a difficult person, someone who you dislike, and picture them very clearly in front of you. They are also just like yourself in wanting to be happy. And so arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness in its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And with each out breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And then imagine they've now found that genuine happiness that they seek. And take delight in this. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest in that inner purity of mind, which is in the nature of loving kindness. Rest in that loving kindness. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Now, a few tips for this practice. As we saw earlier, it's very much recommended to start this practice with ourselves, especially if we're suffering from low self-esteem or even self-hatred. And when we're focusing on others, we can focus in this practice on individuals, but also on groups of people as well. And some of you may have found it a little bit difficult to cultivate this towards the difficult person. And in fact, sometimes we feel like they don't deserve it because it's just such a horrible person. And we're going to answer or look at why it is that we find it difficult to have loving kindness and compassion for difficult people, particularly the ones who behave very badly. And we'll be looking at that in the next session on Wednesday in a topic called cognitive fusion. Also in this practice, we used quite a lot of visualization in terms of light and so forth. Sometimes people find visualization difficult or they find it doesn't really do anything for them. Clear visualization in this practice is not the most important thing. So it doesn't really matter if you don't have very good visualization. The most important thing is the aspiration, wishing them to have happiness. If you find that the visualization doesn't really do anything for you or even sort of gets in the way a little bit, then just leave it out and just do that, the mental aspiration, repeating the mental aspiration. May you be truly well and happy. May you be truly well and happy. That's the key to this practice. Now, some obstacles to this practice. There is what's called the far enemy, which is what is diametrically opposite, which is ill will. So here we're wishing them to be happy. Ill will is we're wishing them to suffer. And we're looking at that in terms of dealing with anger, which also is a wish to harm. We'll be looking at that in the next session on Wednesday. But there's also what's called the near enemy, something that seems to be the loving kindness, but actually is just into corrupting and polluting loving kindness, and that is attachment. So we'll be now looking at how to identify and deal with attachment, because attachment, if it creeps into loving kindness, really corrupts that practice, and then it really is not really loving kindness anymore. It's just simply attachment. So let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at what attachment is and how to deal with it. Attachment is coming from the Sanskrit term raga or the Pali term lobha. And attachment is a mental affliction. In Sanskrit, mental affliction is klesha. And kleshas are mental factors which cause the mind to become agitated or disturbed. And in Buddhist psychology, when we talk about these mental afflictions, when we have the most extensive presentation, we have a presentation of 26 of them. They can be condensed down to 6 root mental afflictions or condensed down into what's called the 3 poisons, the 3 core mental afflictions. Attachment is one of the 3 poisons. And attachment is defined as a mental factor that sees its object as attractive. It exaggerates the object's attractiveness and thus wishes to possess and hold the object. Why? Because attachment believes that object is a source of our happiness. Where does attachment come from? It comes from our distorted view of reality. In particular, the objects of our attachment seem to be the source of our happiness. Now, attachment is to be fully eliminated. It's a mental affliction, and in fact, it's one of the three main ones, the three poisons. But then often people ask, well, if we are to eliminate attachment fully, does that mean I need to eliminate all my desires and passions? Because doesn't that mean the same thing? Here we need to be very careful, because these words, desire and passion, are quite vague, and in fact can have a number of different meanings. In particular, sometimes when we use the word desire and passion, we're simply using it for another word for craving and attachment. Then we need to get rid of that. But also desire and passion can be used in the sense of having some sort of deep aspiration for something. And particularly, and then if it's an aspiration for something worthwhile, then that sort of desire and passion we need to cultivate, we need to increase. So therefore, we need to be very careful when we use terms and what our understanding of those words is. Now, in terms of distorted view of reality, we can look at that in a number of ways. Four main distorted views that come up in the context of Vipassana practice is we tend to see things which are changing as unchanging. We see pleasure as happiness. We saw that earlier. We grasp on where there's no self, an autonomous self. And we tend to see things which are dependent as independent. And so in these three poisons, the three main mental afflictions, the first of those is this ignorance, which is the distorted view of reality. And particularly here at the deepest level, it's this grasping onto an independent me and an independent objective world. And it's on the basis of that really we end up with a lot of attachment. Because if it seems like there's an independent objective world there and we encounter something pleasant, it really seems like that object is the cause of our pleasant experience. So I want that object, i.e. attachment. Or if we have some unpleasant experience, it really seems like that object is really the cause of my unpleasant experience. So aversion, get it out of here. So this distorted view of reality leads to attachment to pleasant things, aversion to unpleasant things. And we'll be looking at that aversion in the context of anger, in dealing with anger in the next session. How to deal with attachment. The first point is to have a clear understanding of what we mean by attachment. So we just saw the definition of the word attachment, and to understand then how attachment really leads to suffering, that attachment is not the source of happiness, it just leads to suffering. We saw already a little bit earlier, often with craving attachment comes frustration, disappointment, and all those sorts of other mental afflictions as well. And then we can develop, by understanding what attachment is and how it really leads to suffering, we can develop the aspiration to deal with it, to be free of it. But then I think the second step we need to do is cultivate the view of genuine happiness, i.e. that the source of happiness and suffering is within. Because as long as we have this worldview, the source of happiness and suffering is out there, then attachment will naturally follow. Because as soon as we see something pleasant, that's making me happy, I want that. Whereas if we can shift that to understand that the source of happiness is within, then we can really start to work on dealing with attachment. And that cultivating view of genuine happiness often comes in Buddhist context within what's called the preliminary practices. Then how to deal with attachment when it arises. The first thing is we need mindfulness, which we cultivate in the shamatha practice. If we can improve our mindfulness, then we can simply watch attachment as it's arising. Normally we can't, because normally as attachment arises, before we notice it's there, it's already got control of our mind and we're already out of control. So what we want to be able to do is catch that attachment before it takes control of our mind. So we have a little window of opportunity before it gets too strong and it takes control of our mind. To catch that window of opportunity, we need mindfulness. Therefore, the shamatha practice is important. And if we can simply observe attachment as it's arising, we're free of it. And then it has no power of us. It can't do anything. It can't go anywhere. It will simply dissipate. We don't need to fight with it. Just watch it and it'll dissipate. In addition to mindfulness, we can also do what's called apply antidotes if attachment's arising. And this often comes from the wisdom or vipassana part of the practice. For example, impermanence is one of the insights we cultivate in vipassana. If we're having attachment towards something or someone, if we can see that object or person as simply changing moment by moment, then there's nothing for attachment to grab hold of and attachment will dissipate. Or at a deeper level, we can use the antidote of emptiness, because when we see that pleasant object, it really seems like the beauty is objectively there. We can then use emptiness to search for the beauty. Where is the beauty in the object? And come to realize there is no beauty objectively in the object, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and therefore also be able to release the attachment. Therefore, by practicing some of these methods of dealing with attachment in meditation and getting familiar with them, then we can apply them in daily life. And that's what we're going to do now. But before that, just one comment. What we've seen here in dealing with attachment, which we're having here as part of the compassion wing of practice, is to actually effectively deal with detachment. We need to be able to, we need the help of the other main areas of practice. So in Buddhism, we begin with the preliminary practices, the foundation practices. On that basis, we engage in the shamatha practice. On the basis of shamatha, cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind, we engage in the two wings of wisdom and compassion. And we see here that these four areas of practice are very nicely packaged in this article written by Alan Wallace called Mental Balance and Wellbeing, where he's attempting to build a bridge between Buddhism and psychology by coming up with these four areas, four types of mental balance called cognitive, attentional, cognitive, affective, to strive for inner well-being. And so his article really reflects this very well. And we see also here from the Buddhist context that if we want to be able to deal with attachment, we need to make sure that we're engaging in all these areas of practice. Because if we leave out the preliminaries, we leave out shamatha, we leave out vipassana, and only try and do the compassion wing, it's going to be very difficult to effectively deal with attachment, as we saw from the previous slide. So let's do that now. Let's do a little meditation of looking at some of these ways of dealing with attachment so we can become familiar with them and then be able to apply them in daily life. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with each out breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in that stillness. Attachment is a mental factor that sees its object as attractive. It exaggerates the object's attractiveness and thus wishes to possess and hold the object. Why? Because it believes it to be the source of our happiness. Let's now have a look at some ways of dealing with attachment. And first, think of a specific person or thing that seems to be crucial to your happiness, that you really need to be happy. And then imagine that you actually have that person or thing and you're holding on tightly, not wanting to lose that person or thing. And picture the scene very clearly. How do you feel? Does the attachment make you feel calm and relaxed? Does that person or thing have the power to bring you the lasting happiness that you seek? And now, if you mentally relax your grip on that person or thing that you're attached to, allowing it to just be, allowing some space, how do you feel? Without the attachment, are you more calm and relaxed? Without the clinging, are you more able to enjoy the presence of that person or thing? Now allow some attachment to the person or thing to arise. And instead of focusing on your object of attachment, look directly at the attachment itself. What is the nature of the attachment? Is it something solid and concrete? Or does it change? And if we look directly at the attachment itself in this way, does it have any power over us? Do we need to fight with it? Or does it simply start to dissolve? Now recall that the person or thing you're attached to is impermanent, changing from moment to moment, in a constant state of change, not remaining the same from one moment to the next, constantly changing. And in seeing this, check whether your attachment towards that person or thing remains the same. Now imagine that person or thing changing over time and becoming very old. And again, check whether your attachment towards that person or thing remains the same. Now again, imagine the person or thing you're attached to clearly in front of you. What is it exactly that makes that person or thing so desirable, so attractive? Mentally dissect the person or thing into its parts and try to pinpoint exactly what it is that is so desirable, so attractive. Now think of someone who may not see that person or thing as pleasing or attractive. Is their perception invalid? Are you seeing that person or thing in the correct way while they are mistaken? Or is it that due to your own experience, you are correctly labeling that person or thing as pleasing or attractive? And that due to that other person having a very different experience, they are correctly labeling that person or thing in a totally different way. And due to your labeling that person or thing as attractive, are you then going on to seeing that person or thing as inherently attractive, attractive from its own side. And as a result, do you develop some attachment, thinking that that person or thing is the source of your happiness? Nothing is inherently one way or another. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And by understanding this, then whether it is a relationship with another person or simply eating a piece of delicious chocolate cake, we won't cling to that experience. And as a result, we'll enjoy that experience more fully. And so, in conclusion, recognize that it is possible to practice these methods of letting go of attachment. And that when we do, we'll feel more balanced and free to enjoy things without clinging. More balanced and free to enjoy and improve our relationships with others. And make a strong determination to do so. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Let's have a look at some common misconceptions regarding attachment and try to correct those before we go to question answer. The first one is that often people feel like, because here we're talking about completely eliminating attachment. And then often there's a lot of doubt about that. And one of them is that people often say, well, but actually I need attachment to enjoy things. Without attachment, my life would become very boring and bland because I'd be detached from everything. As we saw earlier, actually attachment interferes with our enjoyment of the simple pleasures in life. Because craving and attachment, particularly if it's very strong, is already agitating our mind. And then often together with that craving and attachment, as we saw earlier, comes fear, anxiety about not getting it, not getting enough of it, losing it, frustration when we don't get it, overindulging when we do get it, dissatisfaction, disappointment when it doesn't lead up to expectations, and just ends up more craving. And we saw that also that we'll just lose enjoyment if we have a lot of craving and attachment, because we know from our own experience, if there's certain things we really like, but we get them too often, it doesn't take too many times of getting that thing that a craving and attachment will at some point say, sorry, not good enough anymore. I need something bigger, better, and different. And here what we need to understand is that letting go of attachment is not the same as detachment. Often people think there are two choices, either attachment or detachment. And they think that when we talk about letting go of attachment, that means detachment. Actually, not true, because attachment and detachment are the two extremes that we oscillate between. And both of them arise from our distorted view of reality, particularly seeing that the source of happiness and suffering is out there in the world. Seeing that the source of happiness is out there, attachment. Source of suffering is out there, we detach, because it seems like that is causing me suffering. We detach from that as a way of trying to deal with it. So letting go of attachment means to overcome both of those extremes. The middle way between those extremes of letting go of attachment is called non-attachment. And non-attachment is actually fully engaged in experience. It's not detaching from experience. It's not getting caught up with attachment. It's fully engaged without attachment and enjoying things because of the lack of attachment. And that non-attachment comes from the correct view of reality, that the source of happiness and suffering lies within the mind. So therefore, if we let go of attachment, we'll actually enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. When that's explained, then sometimes people go, maybe that makes sense, I'll check that out. But I definitely need attachment. I need attachment to have a relationship. Without attachment, there's no basis for any relationship. And I think here part of the confusion is simply how the word is used. And I think it's used not in the same way in Buddhism and in psychology. Because often in psychology, we hear about attachment theory. And there they talk about healthy forms of attachment you need to actively cultivate. Often the example given is strong bond between mother and child. And also one of the difficulties is that in psychology, there's a lot of talk about emotions. Actually, in Buddhism, we don't really talk about emotions. In fact, I think in Sanskrit and in Tibetan, there is no word for emotion. And so in Buddhist psychology, it's not so much about the emotions, what is the display, but it's what's driving that. So here, then when we talk about mental afflictions, and also we saw in terms of loving kindness and compassion, it's not an emotion, it's what's underlying the intention, the aspiration, the wish that's driving it. And so here we see some definitions of attachment in psychology Buddhism. Psychology one we saw is attachment is a deep and enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. Buddhism wouldn't call that attachment. We need to have strong bonds between ourselves and others. That's not necessarily attachment. Attachment in Buddhism is, again, it's a mental factor that sees its object as attractive. It exaggerates the object's attractiveness and thus wishes to possess and hold the object. And here in a relationship, that means that actually attachment is seeing that person as a thing or an object to satisfy me. So not very nice. Now in our relationships, we have these two dynamics, the healthy one of loving kindness, the unhealthy one of attachment. We are to distinguish those two aspects, increase the healthy one of loving kindness and decrease the unhealthy one of attachment. Then our relationships will improve. How to distinguish them? Love or loving kindness in a relationship is simply the wish for that person to be happy. The fine print is without expecting anything in return, what we would call unconditional love or no strings attached love. Conditional love or strings attached love is love polluted by attachment. And that sounds like this: I will love you as long as, and here comes the condition, as long as you keep saying and doing things that make me happy. Otherwise, no. So that's all attachment speaking. So to distinguish the two, love or loving kindness is saying, I want you to be happy. Attachment is saying, I want you to make me happy. So attachment's all about me, 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 and just sees the other person as an object to satisfy me. Therefore, if we increase loving kindness, decrease attachment, our relationships will improve. Then people hear that and they go, maybe that's true, let me check that out. But I definitely need attachment because I'm a creative person. I need attachment to be creative. If I get rid of attachment, I won't be creative anymore. Completely opposite again. Attachment interferes with creativity. And here we need to distinguish between the source of creativity and the subject matter of creativity. Of course, mental afflictions like craving, attachment, jealousy, anger, and so forth provide a lot of fuel for creativity in terms of subject matter. But the source of creativity is coming from a deeper level of our mind. And as long as our mind is caught up in mental afflictions like craving and attachment, we are suffocating that deeper level of mind. And so if we can work to eliminate mental afflictions like craving and attachment, it opens up a space for creativity to manifest more. So you'll find you'll actually become more creative. And now often we tend to be creative for quite selfish motivations. Like, look at me, how wonderful a musician I am, how wonderful an artist I am. Whereas if we reduce those mental afflictions, not only will we become more creative, we'll become more creative for a more meaningful reason. I think the truly great creative people are the ones who use their creative talents to inspire others for a good purpose. So in summary, by reducing and eliminating attachment, we'll enjoy simple pleasures in life more, our relationships will improve, we'll become more creative for a more meaningful reason. So it's a win-win-win situation. No downside to reducing and eliminating attachment. So now we have some time for question answer. So do we have any questions, Miffy?
Yes, we do, Glenn. So first, I'm just really amazed to hear finally figured out from your explanation about why it's called non-attachment, because yeah, I've never heard it put that way, of attachment and detachment both being distorted and non-attachment having that freedom from the distortion. That's just like the biggest aha moment. Finally, I figured it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so common because people think there's two choices, attachment or detachment. And so when you say let go of attachment, they think, oh, I have to be detached from everything. But that's the other extreme.
Yeah, that's kind of like getting cynical or jaded.
Well, it's from a distorted view. We detach because we think that's causing me so much suffering. I need to detach from that.
Right. So then Robin's asked, why is it that there is so much self-hatred now when in the past or elsewhere there apparently wasn't?
Well, I think it was always there, but I mean, I'm no historian, but it seems like it's really on the increase in the modern world. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think one reason is that in our modern world, particularly due to the prevalence of media, internet and news and everything, they all push the negative news, the bad news. I mean, historically, you didn't hear much news except for what's going on around you. So you didn't get inundated with all this bad news, And so I think that we have been so saturated with that in the modern world that we just completely focus on the negative. And as we're going to see tomorrow, we do that with what's called cognitive fusion, meaning not only do we have a biased view of ourselves and the world, but we identify with that negative behaviors and so forth, which is called cognitive fusion. And it's that identification that is causing the low self-esteem, self-hatred, guilt, and all that. And that's going to be one of the topics I'm going to talk about tomorrow. So maybe the sort of extensive answer to that question will come tomorrow. But I think the short answer is, I think it's just because we have just so much obsessive focus on the negative in the modern world that probably wasn't there in the centuries before, that there was a much more balanced view because we weren't inundated by all that sort of media stuff in the historical world.
Okay, and then Robin also wants to check if she's paraphrasing you correctly by saying that attachment in Buddhism is about using people and things as objects for our own satisfaction. That's what attachment's
Well, not
about.
so much using, it's attached. See, attachment in a relationship, loving kindness is focusing on that person. I want you to be happy. Attachment is not is focusing on me. Attachment's all about me, and attachment sees the other person as an object to satisfy me. So attachment actually doesn't see the other person as a person. It's just person is just an object to satisfy me. And so attachment is all focused on self. So in a relationship, attachment is simply seeing that person as an object to satisfy me.
Okay, so then in the meditation where, we had the person that we like and then the person we dislike, so I found that they were both the same person. And I'm wondering, is that to do with what you were talking about, the near enemy of attachment? You like the person, attachment, and then of course you dislike the person because of attachment. So is that what's going on?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just that one person. I mean, these categories that we talk about, friend, stranger, difficult person. I mean, one person can jump between those categories in one day, you know. Sometimes we can't seem to connect with people we know well, and they're sort of like a stranger, or we don't really care what happens to them. Then suddenly they're really a good friend, and then they've done something we didn't like, and then they become a difficult person. So yeah, I mean, I think that just people can move from one category to another. I mean, even within in a short time, as we know, you know. So suddenly our best friend has become our worst enemy. You know, what happened?
So is what happened attachment, that it kind of got corrupted, having a good friendship became corrupt?
Well, again, I think it's that it's the whole cognitive fusion. We are wrongly identifying people with their behavior. So a friend, a friend is someone who seems to have good behavior towards us. That's why we label them a friend. And someone who's engaging in bad behavior, we sort of label the enemy. And then we identify them with the behavior. And that's why we people easily lose friendships. But suddenly this wonderful person has become a horrible, nasty person all of a sudden. But more will come tomorrow when I talk about this cognitive fusion. I think it'll become more clear then.
And then a question from Ian. So could attachment be classed as an anxiety disorder?
Anxiety disorder. I mean, craving an attachment, I think, can precipitate anxiety, because if we are so obsessed about trying to get something, and then, as I mentioned, you think, oh, I'm not going to get it, then we can get really anxious about that. You know, I need to get that because if without it, I'm not going to be happy. If I miss out there, I'm not going to be happy. So yes, I think fear, anxiety, worry comes out of that. What we saw earlier is the three core mental afflictions are these three poisons. The underlying one is the distorted view of reality. That really precipitates this movement or attachment towards pleasant, aversion moving away from unpleasant. And then all the other stuff, fear, anxiety, worry, resentment, jealousy, all of those things come out of those three, either
So,
individually or a combination. So I think you can trace all those back to one of these core mental afflictions.
so then anxiety disorders would kind of be a result of attachment.
Well, I think anxiety would be a very strong, come out of a very strong attachment. Yes.
Yeah.
To the point of obsession. If we really become obsessed, about someone or something, and we think that I have to have that, then I think you're going to find a lot of fear and anxiety about not getting it. Or if we become obsessed that person or thing is really going to make me suffer a lot, then of course we'll have a lot of fear and anxiety about meeting that there, which is the aversion. So that's coming out of the aversion, because we'll believe that person or thing is really just going to cause me so much suffering. And so we have a lot of fear and anxiety about that. So whether it's missing out on the good or meeting the bad, then fear and anxiety come. But it can only come from those mental afflictions. You can't, if you had a correct view, it would be impossible to have fear and anxiety.
And so then Gail asks, so then is attachment the expectation of what we want?
Attachment is the belief that is going to make us happy. That is the source of our happiness.
Okay.
An expectation often because expectation is then we expect that if I get that, I'm going to be really happy, because attachment believes that is the source of my happiness. Then comes a lot of expectation. And of course, if we don't get it, we get frustrated. And even if we do get it, it doesn't really satisfy us. And so that expectation turns either into frustration when we don't get it, or complete disappointment when it doesn't really live up to our expectations.
Okay. And then the last one from Alina, any tips on how to kind of gently remember or remind ourselves of the changing nature of our relationships?
I think, again, impermanence is the is the sort of the foundation of the Vipassana wing of practice. If we can really just, I mean, I think intellectually we understand impermanence, things are changing all the time, but it's all up here. It's all an vague intellectual idea because scientists have proven it, we believe it. We need to bring it into experience. And we do that through Vipassana practice. So if we can do there are various impermanence Vipassana practices. And if we can start to experientially taste impermanence and bring that into daily life, then you'll find that actually it becomes hard to actually have craving attachment. In fact, in the texts, often when they talk about the antidote for attachment, like in Lam Rim and that, the answer is, what is the antidote for attachment? Impermanence. But again, it has to be experiential. As long as it's just intellectual, it's not going to change anything. So if we do Vipassana practice, we internalize, we start to have an experiential taste of impermanence. You'll find that what that brings into daily life is you'll find that attachment won't disappear overnight, but you'll find that it won't be as intense. And to the degree that you've internalized impermanence, to that degree will attachment be reduced without even thinking about it. You'll just look and you'll enjoy and you go, oh, hang on, I'm not as so attached as I was before. What's going on here? It's because experientially you're seeing this person or thing in a more correct way, because you're starting to see that person or thing as this flow of change. And there's nothing to grab in a flow of change. So attachment's got nothing to grab. So it really can't manifest in any intense way.
Okay, so thank you, Glenn. I know you've just been saying about the next session is tomorrow, but actually it's Wednesday.
Tomorrow, the next session, Wednesday. Yeah, I'll just mention that now. So let me just share the screen again.
Yeah.
And before we mention that, let's dedicate all of our efforts here this evening. And we'll use Shanti Deva dedication prayer to do that. I'll slowly recite it. You can recite along if you want, or just listen to the words. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. So as Murphy mentioned, next session is this Wednesday, session 2 of 5 sessions in this compassion practice program. We'll be looking at the actual compassion practice on Wednesday. And together with that, we'll be looking at anger and how to deal with anger. So until then, stay safe, stay well, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. So bye now.